From sleeping on couches to building my own life, I thought I'd moved on. But when my parents lost everything, the tables turned completely. At 18, my parents told me I'd be crawling back within 6 weeks, begging for forgiveness. My mother's cold laugh still echoes in my memory as my father bolted the door behind me. I got furious. I never looked back. But 11 years later, my phone buzzed incessantly with desperate calls. They were the ones begging me to answer. I wasn't planning on sharing this story publicly, but after seeing similar experiences here, I realized that writing this might help process everything I've been through. Maybe someone facing their own family battles will find something useful in my journey. I don't know. Here's what happened. I'm Christopher, 29 now, but this story begins when I was 18, final semester of senior year. I was never the perfect son my parents envisioned. My dad managed operations at a textile manufacturing facility, and my mom worked as an administrative assistant at a dental office. They weren't wealthy, but we lived comfortably enough in our mid-sized town. They had crafted this entire blueprint for my existence: excel academically, attend state university like my father had, marry a respectable girl from our community, raise 2.5 children, and essentially fulfill their interpretation of suburban success. The problem was, I despised traditional schooling. Not because I lacked intelligence, I maintained solid grades when I applied myself, but I had ADHD, which wasn't diagnosed until years after this drama unfolded. Sitting motionless for hours absorbing lectures about subjects that felt irrelevant was absolute agony. What ignited my passion was hands-on work constructing, repairing, creating tangible results. When I was 16, I spent an entire summer helping our neighbor Marcus renovate his workshop, and it was the first time I experienced genuine competence at something meaningful. My parents absolutely loathed this interest. Every time I mentioned potentially pursuing construction or learning skilled trades, my mother would develop this pinched expression, as if I'd announced plans to become a professional garbage collector. My father would deliver lengthy speeches about maximizing my potential and how people from our background don't engage in manual labor. Looking back with the wisdom that only comes from weathering many storms, I believe they were obsessed with maintaining appearances. They wanted to boast to their social circle about their son, the college graduate, not their son, the blue-collar craftsman. Tension had been building for months. I was working part-time at a local electronics store after classes, methodically saving money because something deep in my gut warned me I might need financial independence. My grades were declining because, honestly, I'd stopped investing emotional energy in academic performance. Every dinner conversation devolved into arguments about college applications, my future prospects, or why I was apparently sabotaging my own life. The breaking point arrived in March, approximately 8 weeks before graduation. I'd been accepted to state university. My parents had essentially completed the application process themselves, but I'd also been researching this vocational program for construction management. It was more affordable, shorter in duration, and actually taught skills that genuinely interested me. I'd been accepted, and they offered me a partial scholarship based on this comprehensive portfolio of projects I'd assembled during my spare time. I decided to inform my parents during dinner. Catastrophic mistake. The moment I mentioned vocational training, my dad slammed his utensil down so forcefully it ricocheted off his plate. My mother began weeping, literally weeping, as if I'd announced a terminal diagnosis. What followed was the most devastating confrontation we'd ever experienced. My father called me ungrateful, claimed I was disrespecting all their sacrifices over the years. My mother kept repeating how disappointed she felt and couldn't comprehend where their parenting had failed. When I attempted to explain my genuine excitement about the program, my dad interrupted and said something that carved itself permanently into my memory. No son of mine is going to waste his potential like that. If you're too foolish to recognize the opportunity you're destroying, then perhaps you're not the son we believed we raised. I completely lost control. Told them I was exhausted living my existence to fulfill their dreams, that I was practically an adult capable of making independent choices, that they never actually listened to my authentic desires. We were all shouting at this point. The argument became vicious, truly vicious. I said things I'm not proud of remembering. They said worse. Finally, my father declared that if I wasn't going to respect their rules and follow their plan, I could remove myself from their house. I think he expected me to capitulate immediately. I didn't. I went upstairs, grabbed the emergency bag I'd already packed, told you my instincts were warning me, and crammed in as many clothes as possible. I collected my laptop, the cash I'd been accumulating, about $1,500, and my essential documents that I'd already gathered: birth certificate, social security card. Thank God for my paranoid preparation. When I descended the stairs with my belongings, my parents looked genuinely shocked, as if they couldn't believe I was actually departing. My mother started with, "You're making a tremendous mistake, and you think you understand everything at 18. My father simply stood by the entrance with his arms folded. As I walked past him, my mother called after me, "You'll be back groveling in 6 weeks. You have absolutely no concept of how brutal reality is." She had this smirk on her face that shattered something fundamental inside me. My father didn't even acknowledge my presence, just slammed the door the instant I was outside. I stood on our front lawn for several minutes, completely numb. It was beginning to drizzle, which felt cinematically appropriate. I remember thinking, well, this is some movie-level dramatic situation happening right now. Then I called my friend Derek, whose parents were genuinely decent human beings. Those initial days were a complete blur. Derek's parents allowed me to sleep on their couch, but I understood it couldn't be permanent. I was still attending school, attempting to graduate while simultaneously figuring out where I was going to live, how I was going to sustain myself nutritionally, and basically how to function as an adult overnight. I couldn't concentrate on anything academic. I kept having these moments where I'd suddenly realize, holy shit, I'm homeless. I'd have panic attacks in the school bathroom, trying to process this new reality. But one thing sustained me through those dark moments of pure, stubborn fury. No way in hell was I going to validate my parents' prediction by crawling back defeated. Derek's mother helped me apply for emergency assistance since I was technically an unaccompanied minor. The guidance counselor at school, one of the few adults who'd ever genuinely listened to me, helped me navigate the legal requirements for emancipation. I increased my hours at the electronics store and picked up a second job washing dishes at a local family restaurant. The most challenging aspect wasn't even the practical logistics, it was the emotional devastation. Witnessing other students with their normal families, hearing classmates complain about trivial disagreements with parents who still loved them unconditionally at the end of the day, realizing that what my parents had done wasn't normal parental behavior. Most parents don't exile their child for wanting to pursue vocational training instead of university. The way they'd always made their love feel conditional wasn't how healthy families operate. About 4 weeks after I left, my mother texted me not to apologize or inquire about my well-being. Just, "When you're ready to apologize and accept our help with our conditions, you can return home." I didn't respond. A week later, my father called and left a voicemail expressing essentially identical sentiments. They were so convinced I'd fail that they were simply waiting for me to come crawling back so they could deliver their "I told you so" victory speech. I graduated high school while living on Derek's couch. My parents attended the ceremony, maintaining appearances, I suppose. They attempted to approach me afterward, but I simply walked away. I had nothing to say to them. By July, I'd saved enough to secure a terrible apartment with 2 other guys. It was absolutely squalid, but it was the first place that belonged to me. I enrolled in that vocational program using my scholarship and working nearly full-time to cover expenses. It was exhausting, but every time I wanted to surrender, I'd remember my mother's smirk and my father's slammed door, and I'd discover the energy to persist. That first year of independence was the most difficult thing I've ever endured. I was lonely, terrified, and constantly exhausted. There were nights I cried myself to sleep because I missed having a family, even my dysfunctional one. There were mornings I woke up and couldn't find the motivation to get out of bed. But I did, every single time. And you know what? I never went back begging. Not after 6 weeks. Not ever. This is getting lengthy, so let me continue with how things started transforming. The first few months living on my own were genuinely nightmarish, not going to lie. After crashing at Derek's place for those initial weeks, I managed to find this absolute disaster of an apartment with 2 other guys. One was this dude Marcus who worked night shifts, so I barely encountered him, and the other was Tyler, who I'm pretty sure was dealing something illegal but minded his own business and paid rent punctually, so whatever. The place had cockroaches that would literally acknowledge you when you illuminated the kitchen. The shower would randomly turn Arctic mid-rinse, nothing like screaming while shampoo streams into your eyes. The walls might as well have been constructed of tissue paper. I knew way too much about our neighbor's relationship drama. But here's the thing, it was mine, or at least one-third mine. No one could evict me as long as I paid rent. I was working these two terrible jobs, electronics store evenings and restaurant weekends, while trying to complete vocational school. Between that schedule and attempting to sleep, I was getting maybe 4 hours of rest nightly. My diet consisted basically of instant noodles, eggs, and whatever leftover pancakes or fries I could obtain from the restaurant. Lost about 25 pounds those first few months, probably looked like a walking corpse most days. The strangest part was witnessing these social media posts from people my age living their best lives, college parties, family vacations, all that normal young adult stuff, while I was trying to determine if I could postpone doing laundry another week because the laundromat required quarters and I needed those quarters for bus fare. My parents attempted reaching out a few times, always with identical energy. When was I going to stop this nonsense and return home, accept their help, follow their plan? They never once inquired if I was okay. Like, hey, your teenage son is living in a roach-infested apartment. Maybe check if he has adequate food. Nope. Just when was I going to admit I was wrong and crawl back defeated? I remember my father actually showed up at the electronics store once, about 4 months after I left. I was restocking computer accessories when my coworker said, "Some guy in business casual is asking for you up front." I peeked out and saw him standing there, looking completely out of place among the gaming equipment and phone cases. I hid in the storage room until he departed, watched him through the window standing in the parking lot for 20 minutes before finally getting in his car. He never returned. Things started shifting about 5 months in. There was this regular customer at the electronics store, Gabriel, who was always purchasing components for different projects. One day, he needed help locating some specific networking parts, and I ended up not just finding them but explaining exactly how to configure them, even sketched him a little diagram. Turned out the guy did home automation and IT consulting, mostly for small businesses and affluent homeowners. He said I clearly understood technology and asked if I'd ever considered helping him out on some projects. The compensation was better than the electronics store, and it was actually related to what I was learning in vocational school. Felt like the first genuine opportunity I'd received since leaving home. Gabriel was nothing like my father. He didn't look down on people who worked with their hands and minds together. He took pride in craftsmanship, would literally stop in the middle of installing a smart thermostat to show me the proper way to route cables or why one configuration technique was superior to another. For the first time, I felt like someone actually recognized potential in me, not just what they wanted me to become. Around the 7-month mark, my parents changed tactics. My mother started texting that she missed me. My father sent this message saying they were willing to compromise on my education if I moved back home. To be honest, it just made me angry all over again. Like, were they seriously expecting me to abandon my independence just because they were now graciously allowing me to make some of my own choices? Hard pass. I finished my first year of vocational school with excellent grades. Turned out, I wasn't too stupid after all. I just needed to be learning something I actually cared about. Gabriel started giving me more responsibility, better compensation. I moved out of the Roach apartment into a slightly better place with just one roommate, this nursing student named Alex, who was nearly as financially struggling as me, but at least understood basic hygiene and respect. By 20, I'd earned my first certification and was making decent money, not Instagram flexing money, but enough to purchase actual groceries, pay bills on time, even start saving a little. Gabriel would recommend me for independent projects on weekends, small IT installations, home network setups, that kind of thing. Building a reputation, building a client list. The fascinating thing about working in people's homes is you observe a lot about how families actually function. I'd be installing a security system, overhearing parents encouraging their children, praising them for accomplishments, hugging them just because. I'd see photographs on walls of family vacations, graduation ceremonies, silly moments, normal families that argued sometimes but still loved each other without conditions. It was eye-opening, made me realize how dysfunctional my own family dynamic had been. When I was almost 21, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. No idea how she discovered my address, probably through some mutual social media connection. I almost didn't recognize her standing there in my doorway. She looked older somehow, more tired. I let her in because what else could I do? It was awkward as hell. She looked around my place with this expression, not quite disgust, but definitely like she was mentally cataloging all the ways my life was inferior to what she'd planned. She asked me these surface-level questions about what I was doing, how I was living, then got to the real reason for her visit. My father had been passed over for a promotion, and they were struggling financially. Wanted to know if I could help out. The audacity actually made me laugh. 3 years earlier, they'd thrown me out, told me I'd fail on my own, and now they wanted me to rescue them financially. I told her I was still establishing myself and couldn't spare anything. She left looking annoyed, like I'd failed some test. Didn't even say she was proud of me for surviving independently. After that visit, I went through a strange emotional period. Started questioning everything. Was I wrong to keep them at a distance? Was I being too harsh? But then I'd remember how they treated me, how they'd never actually apologized, and I'd get angry all over again. My roommate Alex noticed I was in a funk and introduced me to his friend Sophie, who was studying psychology. She became one of my closest friends and kind of helped me understand that what I'd experienced was a form of emotional abuse, that the way my parents had always made their love conditional on me following their exact plan wasn't normal or healthy. Talking to her helped me work through some of my anger and start genuine healing. By 22, I was doing well enough to move into my own place, just a small one-bedroom, nothing fancy, but entirely mine. No roommates, no parents, just me. The day I moved in, I sat on my second-hand furniture and literally cried. Never thought I'd get this far when I was standing on that lawn with my bags at 18. Around this time, Gabriel offered me more stable work with actual benefits, health insurance for the first time since I left home. He was getting more business and needed reliable help. It was a huge vote of confidence and honestly meant more to me than any approval from my parents ever had. Meanwhile, my parents kept trying to reconnect, but always on their terms. They'd invite me to holiday dinners, but make pointed comments about my choices. They'd offer help which I never accepted but with strings attached. Every interaction left me feeling drained and frustrated. Eventually, I started limiting contact to occasional texts and maybe one visit annually. What they never seemed to understand was that I was actually building a meaningful life. It didn't look anything like what they'd planned for me, but it was good. I had work I enjoyed that paid the bills adequately. I had friends who accepted me for who I was. I was building something real, something that was mine. By 24, I had completed additional certifications and was Gabriel's go-to person for certain types of projects. We worked well together, and he started talking about bigger opportunities down the road. That was also when I met Emma. She needed some IT work done in her apartment, and Gabriel sent me. Smart, funny, didn't take any of my defensive attitude. We started dating, and for the first time I let someone really know me, all the baggage, all the history with my family. Instead of running for the hills, she got it. Her own parents weren't perfect, though nowhere near as controlling as mine. Of course, when my parents heard I was seriously dating someone, they suddenly got very interested in my life again. Started following me on social media after years of ignoring my existence. Wanted to meet her, wanted to play happy families. I kept them at arm's length. Emma deserved better than to be dragged into their manipulation games. 5 years after being kicked out, I was in a stable situation, had my own place, was in a healthy relationship, and had built a life entirely on my own terms. My parents' prediction that I'd come crawling back within 6 weeks couldn't have been more wrong. But the story doesn't end there, because just when I thought I'd finally moved beyond their shadow, things were about to get complicated in ways I never saw coming. By the time I was 25, life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. I'd been steadily advancing in my career, gradually building experience and putting money aside whenever possible. Nothing glamorous, mostly technical work, but it paid the bills and kept me moving forward. My apartment was this decent one-bedroom with a functional kitchen and actual space to breathe, but it was mine. No roommates, no parents, just me and my carefully chosen possessions. So I was scrolling through social media one evening when this notification appeared. My cousin Madison had tagged me in a photo from some family gathering I obviously wasn't at. Didn't think much of it until I noticed my parents in the background. Mom was wearing this artificial smile I knew all too well, and Dad was mid-sentence, probably telling one of his same tired stories. But the weird thing on the table next to them was this framed photo of me from my high school graduation. Like, what? These people kicked me out, barely reached out except when they wanted something, and now they're displaying my photo like we're some happy family. I called Madison immediately, and she was like, "Oh yeah, they talk about you all the time. Always telling everyone how proud they are of you." The audacity, I swear. It was like they were living in an alternate reality where they hadn't told me I'd be crawling back within 6 weeks. Anyway, around this time my relationship with Emma was getting more serious. We'd been together for about a year, and she'd become this incredible anchor in my life. She had this way of seeing through people's facades, including mine. On our fourth date, we ended up talking about families, and I opened up about my situation. Expected the usual awkward, "That's rough" response, but instead she told me about how her stepfather had been similar, not as extreme, but the same controlling vibe. She understood in a way most people didn't. That night we stayed up until like 4 and just talking, and for the first time I didn't feel like my family drama was this dark secret I had to hide. A few months into our relationship, my water heater decided to die a dramatic death. Came home to find water seeping under my bathroom door, had to shut off the main valve and spent 4 days taking ice-cold showers at the gym while waiting for my landlord to arrange repairs. Emma suggested I stay at her place, but honestly, it felt too soon. That whole independence thing I'd developed was hard to shake. Around this time, my old high school friend Derek got engaged, and I was invited to the wedding. Hadn't seen most of these people in years, and honestly, I was nervous about what they'd think. Would they see me as the guy who failed, who didn't go to college, who disappeared? But when I showed up with Emma, everyone was just normal. Asked what I was up to, seemed genuinely interested when I explained my work. No judgment, no comparisons to some imaginary life I should have had. Then came the awkward moment. Derek's mom, who'd let me crash on their couch right after I got kicked out, pulled me aside and told me my parents had been asking about me. Apparently, they'd run into her at the grocery store and spent 30 minutes fishing for information. Where was I living? What was I doing? Was I doing okay financially? That last question set off alarm bells. Sure enough, a week later my mom texted out of nowhere, "Christopher, your father and I are having a small gathering for Memorial Day. Would be lovely if you could come. Bring your friend if you'd like." Friend, not girlfriend, like she couldn't acknowledge Emma was important to me. And the timing was suspicious, right after they'd been asking about my finances. I showed Emma the text, and she just raised an eyebrow and said, "So they want something." I decided to go partly curiosity, partly still seeking some closure I hadn't found. Emma came with me for moral support, even though she was like, "This has disaster written all over it." Walking into that house was surreal as hell. Everything looked exactly the same furniture, same photos on the walls, now including that graduation picture, same smell of my mom's weird vanilla air freshener that always gave me a headache. But I felt like a visitor, not someone coming home. This small gathering was basically just my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my dad's work friend Marcus and his wife. Everyone acted super normal, like I was just a son who'd been away at school or something. The entire time, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It finally came after dinner. My dad pulled me into his study, that sacred space I'd never been allowed to enter as a kid without permission. He started with small talk about the economy, how things were tough all over, and then finally got to the point. He'd been laid off at work after 28 years at the same company. They'd replaced him with some young guy with a fancy degree who'd work for half the salary. The irony wasn't lost on me, all those years pushing me toward college, and now he was bitter about college graduates. He didn't outright ask for money, but kept hinting at their temporary difficulties and how families should support each other in hard times. I just sat there thinking about the night that'd thrown me out, my mom's smirk, her certainty I'd be back begging within 6 weeks. I told him I'd think about it. That was all I could manage without saying something I'd regret. Emma and I left soon after, and in the car she just looked at me and said, "Well, that was the most passive-aggressive dinner I've ever survived." For the next few weeks, the texts from my mom became more frequent. How was I doing? Had I thought about what my dad mentioned? Did I need their old dining table since they were updating the house? Translation: selling furniture to pay bills. Meanwhile, my life was actually on an upswing. I'd found a really good position at this local technology firm and nothing fancy, but stable with actual benefits. Emma and I were getting more serious, talking about maybe finding a bigger place together since my one bedroom was getting cramped and her roommate was driving her nuts. Then came the social media post that changed everything. My mom wrote this long, dramatic post about hard times and trusting God's plan during unemployment. That was obviously a fishing expedition for sympathy and help. The comment section was full of relatives and church friends offering prayers and support. But what got me was the last paragraph. We're so blessed to have our son Christopher supporting us through this trial. Family truly is everything. I nearly choked on my coffee. I hadn't agreed to anything, hadn't given them a penny, and here she was publicly announcing that I was financially supporting them. The comments were all praising what a good son I was. I called her immediately, asked what the hell that post was about. She acted surprised by my anger, said she was just expressing gratitude for my emotional support, and that people assumed the rest. But I knew exactly what she was doing, creating public pressure, so I'd feel obligated to help. That night, Emma found me making a spreadsheet of my finances, trying to figure out if I could afford to help them without derailing my own life. She sat down next to me, took my hand, and asked, "What would you tell a friend in your situation?" And that hit me hard. If someone told me their parents had kicked them out at 18, barely contacted them for years except when convenient, and were now expecting financial support, I'd tell them they didn't owe those people anything. So I made a decision. I texted my mom that I wouldn't be providing financial support, that what they were going through was tough, but I was still building my own life, still recovering from being thrown out as a teenager. I suggested some local resources for job seekers and financial assistance, the same ones I'd had to use years ago. Her response was a single "okay," then silence for 4 weeks. Until yesterday, when my phone exploded with notifications, texts, calls, voicemails, all from my parents and various relatives. Apparently, my parents' financial situation had gone from bad to worse. Dad still hadn't found work, they were facing possible foreclosure, and somehow this had all become my problem to solve. My aunt left a voicemail saying I needed to step up and be the man your father raised you to be. The irony of that statement made me laugh out loud in a way that probably wasn't entirely healthy. Emma and I stayed up late talking about it, about boundaries and family and obligations, about the difference between forgiveness and forgetting, about what I could live with both emotionally and financially. I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to help because, despite everything, they're still my parents. Another part remembered standing on that lawn with my bags, my mom's absolute certainty that I'd fail without them. The roles had completely reversed now in a way neither of us could have imagined. 11 years ago, they thought I couldn't survive 6 weeks without them. Now they're the ones who can't manage without me. Not sure if that's karma or just the universe's twisted sense of humor. I decided to meet with them the next day alone at a coffee shop, neutral territory. I had some conditions in mind if I did decide to help, and boundaries that would not be crossed again. Life's weird, guys. 11 years ago, they thought I couldn't survive without them. Now they're the ones who need me. So yesterday, I left off with a bit of a cliffhanger. The day before my big meeting with my parents, I got a frantic call from my mom. At first, I ignored it, honestly. I was way too busy with work stuff and dealing with a major project deadline. But then she called 6 more times in a row, then my aunt called, then my cousin. Something was clearly up. When I finally answered, my mom was crying so hard I could barely understand her. After she calmed down, she told me my dad had been laid off again, but this time it was worse. They were 4 months behind on their mortgage, the car had just died, and now they'd gotten an eviction notice. They had 3 weeks to come up with the money, or they'd lose the house. I sat there in my office, staring at the wall of certifications and awards I'd earned over the years, feeling nothing. No, that's not quite right. I felt annoyed. Annoyed that after everything, after 11 years, they were still pulling this same manipulation. Still expecting me to drop everything and rescue them. And of course, the timing couldn't have been worse right before one of the most important project deadlines of my career. I told my mom I'd call her back, hung up, and just sat there for a while. Emma came in and we'd moved in together 6 months earlier and immediately knew something was wrong. After I explained, She didn't tell me what to do, just asked what I wanted to handle it. That's one of the million reasons I love her. So I made a decision. I'd deal with my parents after finishing my work project. One crisis at a time. I turned my phone off, focused on my preparations, and tried to put family drama out of my mind. The project went amazingly well, like surprisingly well. The client was impressed with my solutions and approach. They asked tough questions, but I'd prepared for them. By the end, they were talking about potentially expanding our contract for future projects. It was literally everything I'd worked for since that rainy night when I'd stood on my parents' lawn with nowhere to go. When I turned my phone back on afterward, I had 34 missed calls. Not just from my parents, but from aunts, uncles, cousins, even people I barely knew. My voicemail was full. My social media messages were blowing up. Apparently, my mom had mobilized the entire extended family to pressure me into helping them. I drove home feeling this weird mix of emotions, pride about work, anger about my family's tactics, and this creeping sense of obligation I couldn't quite shake. When I walked in, Emma was on the couch with her laptop, and she had this look on her face, part concern, part, "You're not going to believe this." Turns out my mom had posted this long, dramatic thing on Facebook about how they were losing their home and how certain people, wonder who had forgotten that family comes first. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. Several relatives had commented with stuff like, "I'm sure Christopher will help when he sees this, and family is everything. He'll come through." I just stood there reading these comments on Emma's screen, feeling my blood pressure rise with each one. They were trying to publicly shame me into bailing them out. After everything they'd put me through, they still thought they had the right to manipulate me like this. I decided right then enough was enough. I was done with the vague boundaries, the occasional help, the strained holiday visits. It was time to either fix this relationship for real or end it completely. I texted my parents saying I'd meet them the next day at their house. Just me, them, and 11 years of unresolved issues. That night, I barely slept, kept thinking about what I would say, what they might say back. Emma held me and reminded me that whatever happened, we had built a good life together. That no matter what went down with my parents, I had a family now, her, our friends, the people who'd actually been there. I drove to their house the next morning feeling calmer than I expected. Their neighborhood hadn't changed much since I was a kid, but their house looked smaller, shabbier. The paint was peeling, the lawn needed mowing, the flower beds my mom used to obsess over were full of weeds. It was like seeing the physical manifestation of their decline. My dad answered the door. He'd aged so much in the past few years, thinner, grayer, shoulders permanently stooped like he was carrying something heavy. He didn't say anything, just nodded and stepped aside to let me in. The inside was worse. Cluttered, dusty, with that slight smell houses get when basic maintenance starts slipping. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she started with the whole, "Thank God you're here. We knew you'd help" routine, not even waiting to hear what I had to say. I cut her off and told them both to sit down. For once, I was going to talk, and they were going to listen. I laid it all out. How they'd thrown me out over wanting a different future than they'd planned. How they'd predicted I'd come crawling back within 6 weeks. How for years they'd only contacted me when they needed something. How they'd never once genuinely apologized or acknowledged how wrong they'd been. My dad tried to interrupt with the usual excuses. They were doing what they thought was best. I was being disrespectful. They had given me everything growing up. I just held up my hand and kept going. I told them about those first few months after they kicked me out. Sleeping on couches, working multiple jobs, crying myself to sleep from exhaustion and loneliness. How I'd had to figure out basic adult stuff on my own because they decided their conditional love was more important than their actual child. My mom started crying again, saying they'd made mistakes, but they were still my parents and family had to stick together. That's when I really lost it. Asked where this family sticks together attitude was when I was 18 and homeless. Pointed out that they only seemed to remember we were family when they needed my help, not when I needed theirs. The conversation went around in circles for a while. They'd apologize vaguely, then immediately follow it with justifications or turn it back on me. Classic narcissist playbook. Eventually, I got tired of it and laid out my terms. I would help them avoid foreclosure this one time, but after that they needed to downsize to something they could actually afford. 2. They had to take down that manipulative Facebook post and tell everyone that they were working through their financial issues privately. 3. If they wanted any relationship with me going forward, we'd all start therapy together, not for reconciliation necessarily, but for establishing honest communication and proper boundaries. 4. They needed to understand that my life, my relationship, my choices were mine. Any future support, emotional, financial, whatever, would depend on them respecting that. I expected arguments, guilt trips, the usual tactics. Instead, my dad just looked defeated, like he finally realized he had no cards left to play.